They
Well,
need
it
a
is-
backup.
And month and a half, that's plenty of time.
It is the like, I mean, if you were to like come into this situation as someone with military knowledge and not know anything about it, right? Like if you were to say, you know, we're on this side, here's the battlefield map, how do we win this war? You know, the clear answer would be to try and cut and capture Melitopol. You know, clear as day. Like if Melitopol can be captured, the land bridge can be cut. Crimea is highly vulnerable at that point. Now, like, you know, does Ukraine have the combat capability to do that? You know, that's I think really what we're debating here. Like that's questionable. Like a lot of these units that were supposed to be used in a potential assault for like that were transferred to Bakhmut instead. And you know, you have these new units, and this is the story going on in Western media and specifically U.S. media, is that these this equipment that's being sent, which, you know, this isn't all it's going to be. You know, the U.S. has over 2,000 Bradley fighting vehicles, and they're being retired as we speak. Like there's replacement coming out for those. So, you know, obviously, like we haven't made 2,000 replacements for the Bradley fighting vehicle, but like as production ramps up, as the U.S. be able, you know, as they look into the future and be like, all right, well, we're not going to be in a situation where we need to use, you know, 2,000 of them in the next 6 months. So let's go ahead and send another 50 or another 100. And, you know, they can kind of like predict out ahead of time, like how, you know, how many is too many. Like we obviously still need them, right? You know, like we don't have fully equipped brigades at this point. So, you know, there will be more and more deliveries of these things. And the idea is, you know, 60,000 troops between the UK and the EU that are being trained for Ukraine will be able to be fully equipped with Western equipment in order to face off and combat this new Russian force that it's believed by the West, which, you know, like we could debate this. Like I think, I mean, for a long time, I've thought that this force of reservists would enter the fight in the wintertime. But, you know, Western experts seem to be completely convinced that it's not going to happen until May. So, you know, following along that line of thought, if it doesn't happen until May, Ukraine will have enough equipped brigades in order to man the front and stop any of this from happening. You know, stop these new Russian troops from making a difference. From then they can talk about an attack towards Melitopol with potentially more Western equipment. But that pushes me on to, you know, so like this is all obviously like, you know, looking into the future, trying to see like what's the theory, what's the best way to capture Crimea. There's not a chance that it's going to happen in the spring. Like if you ask me, like the soonest it could possibly happen, like what needs to happen first is they need to stop the Russian advance in the Donbass. You know, they need, if Bakhmut and Soledar falls, they need to stop the Russians from capturing Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, and then they need to fend off this new force of 300,000 Russians, whatever direction they're coming from, right? Like whether it's Belarus or Sumy, Chernigiv, or Kharkiv, like wherever, you know, there's a million different places they can enter the country in from there. So once they deal with that, then they can start talking about Crimea, right? So, I mean, there's a long way to go before it's even a question. You know, at this point, it's just like really big optimism. But what I want to ask you guys is, what do you think of some of these new vehicles that are being introduced to the battlefield that have not yet been introduced before? So in terms of what's being sent, Marder fighting vehicles, which is the German IFV, BMP, whatever you want to call it, along with French light reconnaissance tanks. I can't think, it's like AMX 10
AMX-10.
AMX 10s or something like that, right? And then the Bradley M2, M3. And then there's also discussion, of course, which it hasn't happened yet, of Leopard 2s, Challenger tanks, and the Stryker fighting vehicle, which I think is one of the more likely ones. It's basically equivalent to like Ukrainian BTR-4. You know, it's something that, in terms of like operation, we'll need some training on it, but like it's basically an 8-wheeled vehicle, just like the BTR. They have some of them are equipped with like a battlefield cannon on the top of them, so it's like kind of the only like true assault gun in existence. right now, the U.S. actually didn't find them to be very useful at all, and they're being retired as well. So that's one of the reasons why I see them as being likely to be transferred. But what do you guys think of those, starting with the Martyr?
So I think that it's basically the topic of my latest video, but I think that the qualitative features of these vehicles, it's not that it's not important, but we saw that it's not that important compared to the amount that you have. So yes, they're very good. They can be very good, but it's only 40. Now,
Mm-hmm.
some people they say, yeah, but it can only 40 martyrs can bring 20 squads to the front at once. You have 6 men per vehicle. It's not that much, if you ask me. However, what I think Ukrainians do with these vehicles is that they do some sort of helicopter insertions. So you have a vehicle that brings a squad into a building, then pulls back, then brings more troops. So this is what they seem to be doing. So the Ukrainian army is still very infantry heavy. So I don't think that these vehicles
Do you
are
think that
better.
increases survivability of some of these vehicles, like not using them heavily on the front?
Sorry?
Do you think that increases the survivability of some of these vehicles, like not directly using IFVs to engage other Russian IFVs, like just using them to drop off infantry with, anti-tank weapons instead?
Well, in my opinion, the best would be to have them engaged, but as of now, they don't have enough for really have an impact. And the other problem, and this is just a hunch, just a feeling I have, I cannot support it with anything, but I feel that in the Ukrainian army, instead of repairing the equipment, the moment some of the equipment is damaged, they just ship it back and ask for new stuff. There's not this idea of repairing cannons, repairing vehicles. And I've seen that a lot. Whenever there's the artillery unit self-propelled overuse, instead of replacing the cannon, they ask for a new one. And that's the feeling I've got. I can't really
This is kind of
support it,
interesting
but
because the way, as soon as you mention that, I think of a whole different scenario here, kind of like almost like a scheme to get more equipment. Because I have seen some of that where they're sending entire replacement, like crabs or whatever, but they're also sending it back. So, once they send a new one because they're like, this is to replace the old one that doesn't work anymore. But then they repair the old one and then they end up sending it back because they're like, oh, this already belongs to Ukraine. So what you're suggesting could be a scheme to get more, vehicles from the West. Which,
Okay. I have a
Well, I will
bunch of.
come-
You can start.
Oh, I just want to say, coming back to the effectiveness of all these new equipment,
Yeah.
I don't think it makes much difference. I think it's
Exactly.
because you have to look at it in a very simple term. So what are these IFV? So basically they are so armored vehicles that can carry troops. They have autocannons. Some of them got ATGMs, and that's it. There's no difference from the BMPs and whatever they had, or the BTRs that they had before that. And anything that can destroy the BMPs, can destroy the Martyrs, can destroy the Bradleys, is the same. So technically, survivability, not much difference. A tank saw it, hit it, it dies. A ATGM saw it, hit it, it dies. It's the same thing. So even if you have certain high tech, or certain qualitative edge, you still die if you get spotted. It's not that much difference. An autocannon from a Bradley is not going to be a much difference from an autocannon from a BMP. No, not that difference in terms of the kind of firepower that can throw at the enemy. Not that much difference. So it's just another vehicle. It's just that in terms of operational, maybe it's better. Maybe because NATO is better. Everything West is better, right? So yeah. So otherwise, but on the battlefield, it's just not going to make very much difference. It's the way how they use it is more important, which is why I think History Legend said it quite well. Or is it Ian? Know how you use it, sending the troops in or out and out, or or do you just use it as a fire support vehicle? Then, if to preserve it, I think use it as a transport might make a lot of sense. But if you use it for fire support, I think Ian was saying that using it as a transport, but I think that is likely to be the case if you really want to use it well, because you don't have a lot of them. and Ukraine is severely infantry heavy because they have so many mobilized troops, but they don't really have the heavy equipment to go with it. So it's not that infantry doesn't work. So infantry still works as long as you give them the stingers, all the anti-tank weapons, the RPGs. They can still wreak havoc to an armored company. So I think the best use probably for the Ukrainians is still how to improve the operations of the infantry with all these IFV. Because if you use them for direct fire support, then you're risking them to be destroyed. And then it's very hard to replace because it's so hard to back for them. I mean, Zelensky have to literally do all sorts of things to threaten and shame or beg. I don't know what he did to try to get all these vehicles. And in the end, all they give is still a handful. It's still not a lot. So so they have to use it more wisely. So I think using it as transport does make a lot of sense. Yeah, that's just my thought.
Okay, so I have written down the points on my notebook because I had to keep remember
That's
all
a nice
of them.
notebook.
Yeah, starting out with the quality of
Don't
these.
bluff, right? You're copying the notes, right? You gotta steal everything, right? To do your videos.
Okay, so first of all, the quality of these vehicles. First of all, they are same quality as the Russian counterparts from the 80s and 90s. These are old models, all of them. They all have the same names as the modern models, but they are all old models that they want to send. For example, the Leopard tanks, the Leopard 2A4, that's the one they want to send. And the current model is the Leopard 2A7. The Leopard 2A4 was sent to Turkey. Turkey bought a bunch of them. Then they used them in the operation in Syria, and then Russian artillery bombed it.
No, it
And
was
there's an
the Kurds and mines
Yeah.
and RPGs, like very simple
yeah.
stuff.
Exactly. So
Very simple.
if that can destroy them, then the Russian military can easily get rid of them. So if sending 10 or even 100, that wouldn't make a big difference. It wouldn't be different from the T
100 will make a difference.
sent.
I think
What?
so.
I think 100 will make a difference.
I say it will make a difference, but the same as
I can do tank
You're
rush.
saying it
that
wouldn't
they
make a
send.
qualitative difference,
Yeah.
like in terms of like 100,
It's the same as
100 Leopard
T-72s,
2s
yeah.
aren't going to destroy 150 T-72s. You know,
Exactly.
like okay.
But
yes, it will make a difference, but the Russians can send 1,000 to every 100 they send. And then going back to other points that we have gone through. First of all, you mentioned that they were building up 2 army corps with 8 brigades. If I heard that right.
yeah, 8 brigades, yeah.
I think they should know that an army corps is between 80 and 100,000 soldiers, not 16,000. That's less than a division.
But that's the thing. Now, these days they name stuff. It's typical, let's say, Russian to have different sizes. For example, even during World War II, the Russians would have armies, but the Germans would have army corps. So it's the same strength, but they don't have necessarily the same sizing.
They're building 2 divisions and they want to equip those with Western weapons. And those are for example, the MX-10, the Bradleys, all of these things. And then they're asking for tanks enough to build them as well. They will probably receive that. And if it's ready by March or April, or maybe even May, then I think by that time, the Russians will be able to equip 4 times as much with the same quality of equipment, if they want to. As for the Melitopol question, I think a counterattack by the Ukrainians towards Melitopol to cut the land bridge between Crimea and Russia, I think that is in the same category as Russia attacking Lviv and trying to cut off the land bridge by the Ukrainians to NATO countries. I think it's in the same question. The Ukrainians being able to cut off Melitopol is as difficult as for the Russians to cut off Lviv.
I don't think so. I think it's way more doable for Ukraine to reach the Azov Sea and Melitopol than for the Russians to go to Lviv and everything.
Yeah, there's the reason why I suggest that's the scenario for winning the war is like that is the most vulnerable point of Russia. And I actually heard like a really good explanation recently somewhere on YouTube. Shout out to whoever said this. I don't remember your name, but they made the argument that the goal of the Russian government might not have ever been the complete capture of Ukraine. They made the argument that it 100% had everything to do with Crimea, not even necessarily the Donbass, but they had captured Crimea in 2014, or I mean, really jumping back to 2008 to not like get too lost in this. In the 2000s, at some point, Ukraine ended up getting their first pro-Western president, whatever his name was. He was the first guy running the country that said, we are not going to renew the lease on the naval base in Sevastopol. Red flags go up in Moscow. They're like, holy shit, like that's not cool. It kind of blew over because then a pro-Russian president got elected after that. But then you have the 2008, invitation to NATO, along with, a couple years later, the 2014 Orange Revolution, right, in Ukraine. So at that point, Russia said, well, obviously, our guy just got overthrown in Ukraine. The government that comes in is going to be very pro-Western. There's not a chance in hell they're going to approve this naval base for another lease in Crimea. And the Russians for a long time have seen Sevastopol as being like, one of the most important strategic locations in the entire country. It commands the Black Sea, and the Black Sea is the only area where Russia has warm water ports, right? So like they can't, without the Black Sea, they can't do any trade in the winter. The country's budget goes to shambles at that point. So they seize Crimea. Everything's all kumbaya down there for a couple years, but Ukraine dams up the river, making the entire peninsula completely unviable. Or I'm sorry, the canal. They dam up the canal.
Turn off the water
Turned
supply.
off the taps. There's no water. So Russia's able to build a bridge to get across there, but there was some signs that there was starting to be more Ukrainian sentiment in Crimea, whereas like when they captured it in 2014, it was very much like pro-Russia at the time, but that sentiment was starting to dissipate because economic troubles were so great in Crimea for the farmers, for the working population. Or people were starting to say, well, maybe we should have stayed with Ukraine. And then at that point, it got so bad, javelins started floating into Ukraine. So Russia was like, all right, we have to connect a land bridge here if we want to hold on to Crimea. Like, this is the future of Russia. This is the most important point. So, by threatening that once again, they're basically, I mean, that's the key to victory here. But whether or not the Ukrainians can do it, like I'm convinced that I don't think it can. And I guess I would kind of disagree with you. I think that for the Russians to attack through Belarus to Lviv, I think the distance and cutting off Ukraine from NATO through that, I guess what you would call the Polish Gap there, is a lot greater than the distance for the Ukrainians to reach Melitopol, which is all the further you have to go. Melitopol actually, there's a kind of an inlet that comes in from the ocean there. There's no access point to the south of Melitopol.
All right. So the reason why I said that they are comparable is, first of all, the front line comparison on the southern front right now, I think it's equal. I think there's as much or as many Ukrainian troops as there are Russian troops on the southern front. And if we take that and say, okay, equal troops in the south, but Russia has 150,000 troops in reserve. And if we count the 12,000 troops the Ukrainians have in the north, and combine that with the 36,000 they want to create with the NATO equipment, that's 50,000 in the north. So if Russia sends all of their reserves to the north, 150,000 against 50,000, that's the 3-1 advantage they need for an offensive operation. And at the same time, they will have superior firepower. And at the same time, they'll have air supremacy and all of the other factors that increase their chances of success. While if we look at the southern front, then there will be no reinforcements for either side. It will just be the same. So the Ukrainians cannot plan an offensive in Melitopol if all of their reserves are sent to the north to fight the Russian reserves. So we will have the 3-1 advantage to the north and an equal situation in the south. Then they can, of course, send troops from the south to the north. But in that moment where they are transported, they will be at a disadvantage from in the south and in the north. So either way, the Ukrainians have to build up more troops faster if they want to counter the Russians. And all of that will fall apart if the Russians decide, okay, the Ukrainians are building too many, we will just build more again. So essentially, and from my perspective, with the information and the data I have, the Russian has the significant advantage in the north and are able to conduct such an operation.
Honestly, I don't see the Russians attack from the north really, because first of all, we don't really know how many Russian troops are there. You know, in my opinion, the Russia just sends in troops there to kind of blur the lines, but to get them trained, and then they send them to the front somewhere else. Because it's not. Let's think about it. It's not like a video game where you can open a new front at will. You know, you have to supply these men and everything, right? I think for the Russians, the less front line they have, the more their firepower is important. The reason why the Russians had to withdraw from huge parts of Ukraine is that it was perfect for infantry. The artillery couldn't keep up with all the problems. So the Russians just took a small front line and they're just going to bulldoze it from there and use a lot numerical advantage in some parts and just keep pushing forward. It's not something crazy. Maybe they're going to launch an attack north of Kupiansk, maybe. But even there, I think the Russians are going to be very unimaginative because everything they tried, like too big, the logistics can't keep up. And then they get surrounded and attacked, flanked, you name it. That's my opinion.
And what you say aligns perfectly with the doctrine, which was the last point I wrote down. And that is the doctrine being fought with in Ukraine is not the Soviet doctrine. Neither is it the NATO doctrine. It is, what is his name, Gerasimov? It is his doctrine. And the reason I say this is, first of all, he has created his own doctrine as the commander-in-chief of the Russian army. He has written multiple articles and books about it. And I've read one of those articles where he describes his doctrine. And there was a interview by the Times to Surovikin, I think his name is, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, where he states that the smartest solution, he states
Surovikin
that
is the
Russian one, yeah. I always confuse those two. So Solushny says in that interview that the smartest person he knows is what was his name? Gerasimov. And that he was his teacher, and he has all of his books. And he has read all of his books, and they are in his office. And he's been taught by him. And he was his teacher during the Soviet time. So Surovikin and Solushny and Gerasimov are using the same doctrine in Ukraine against each other. It's like Obi-Wan Anakin type of shit.
So we know who is going to win, right?
Yeah, exactly. Obi-Wan. No, it's literally.
You cannot have spoiler, you know.
Oh, bro, you spoiling.
People
It's a
haven't watched
20-year-old
Star
movie,
Wars.
okay? It's a 20-year-old movie. Anyways,
Yeah.
so literally
Wait,
it is
Obi-Wan
a doctrine.
wins?
And what?
Oh my god!
and
Look,
what you said.
spoiler.
What you said. I don't know if you've also read the article, but what you said is perfectly aligned with the current Russian doctrine, which is they do not want to come into contact with the enemy. It's literally written in it. They want contactless fighting and high mobility, which is, after I read that, it perfectly explains the scenario in Kharkiv, as the Russian forces, as soon as the Ukrainians started advancing, they just pulled back. They pulled all of their troops and just retreated. We do not know how many Russian troops there were, but all of them retreated. And they just kept going. And this whole time, the Ukrainians were attacking. They were attacking with artillery and they were attacking with airstrikes. So the whole doctrine and capabilities of the Russian army has been built after this doctrine since 2013. So this whole doctrine is about, we do not want to see the enemy. We do not want to come into contact with the enemy. Our only purpose is to destroy the enemy. And the way we do that is by retreating, having high mobility so we can outrun the enemy, keep retreating until we destroy the enemy. So it's perfectly aligned with the Mongol tactics. We do not want to fight them. we don't want to come into contact and we don't want to risk dying. We want to win a war without a single casualty. That's the point of the doctrine. Of course, it's not perfect. They've lost a lot of soldiers. However, this is something that has kept their casualty rate very low. And this is why they focus so heavily on artillery.
But there's another part of the Russian doctrine that, although it's not written down, but something that we see on paper right now in Ukraine. So I think the Battle of Mariupol was a big victory for the Russians, but at the same time, they saw that the traditional way of encircling the enemy and then destroying that force, although they got a lot of prisoners and all this, it took forever. It took a lot of effort to get that down. Because when, just like the Mongol tactics again, when you have, and Sun Tzu talks about it, when you have your back against the wall, you fight even harder. So they're like, okay, if we encircle them, they will fight for every building and it's going to be very complicated. So then they changed tactics in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They surrounded the enemy, but they let a gap open all the time. So the enemy has a choice between encirclement and annihilation prison camps, or they can withdraw and fight another day. And this is what happened at Lysychansk. This is what happened a few days ago at Solidar. The Russians simply went on both flanks and basically always they always let the door open for the troops to retreat. Some got caught in the encirclement, but let's be honest, they wanted these guys gone. They don't want urban battles. It's too complicated and it's very deadly. And I think this is the plan for Bakhmut as well. They fix the troops around Bakhmut, but then they encircle it and they hope that within some time, the Ukraine command will just pull the troops back and they will get the city without fighting for each street. And this is the Russian art of war at the moment, very similar to maybe the Mongols, I don't know, but that's what we see. They don't want to
You're
fight.
talking the offensive side of it, right?
Yeah, and this is
Go
what
ahead.
they keep. This is what they keep doing for every city: surround, encircle, leave a gap open. And the Mongols did the same thing: let the enemy withdraw, and then you attack somewhere else. And for them, it's the fastest way to capture cities instead of month-long battle.
To go with what Weeb was saying about Grassrov's doctrine, you actually hear almost the exact same thing repeated in some of these Foreign Legion interviews, which actually I found the name of the channel. It's this Willie OAM. Says he was a crew commander in Afghanistan, and after he left, he was diagnosed with an incurable and inoperable brain tumor. So since then, he's been, he's found kind of a passion for conflict media and stuff. It's actually very interesting. I suggest you guys check him out. Very good interviewer. But several of the guys that I've seen on this channel have basically said exactly what you're saying, Weeb. It's like whenever the situation comes up and the opportunity comes up for a pitched battle, the Russians run away from the fight. And the guy that he's interviewing describes it in a different way because obviously he has some animosity for the Russians, but he says they're never looking for a good fight. They'll always pull back and then bombard the area with artillery. And like that's been the story of the entire war. So like when I hear points like that coming directly from people on the ground fighting, like I find some of these reports of like, heavy Russian casualties to be kind of unbelievable in my opinion. But I mean, we can talk about that forever. To go with what you were saying about a potential, looks like Historylegends has.
No, you're absolutely right, because I remember reports where the Russians would claim they took a village, and then they would claim that like they took the village 5 times in the matter of a month. Every month, every week, they captured the village. I'm like, didn't you guys already hold it?
Right.
But what
they
you
would
just said
would
makes sense.
pull back every time. Apparently, they would retreat. If they saw the fight coming, they would get the hell out of there, let the Ukrainians come into the village, and then just start hitting them with artillery again until they, end up taking it back. And then if they see a strong counterattack that they think will result in casualties, rinse and repeat over and over again.
This exact thing happened in Opitne, I think 2 weeks ago, where the Wagner just pulled back. They had just captured an area and then they just pulled back. And then the Ukrainians media was celebrating. We have just recaptured Opitne. It was like half of the village. And then the next day, they captured even more territory. The Russians captured even more territory than they withdrew from. So they just pulled this bait and switch.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. To get with this,
in my coverage, right? It's not from my observation from my coverage, it's not so much of the withdrawal because I don't really declare a place captured so easily. So like a lot of people say that Opine has been captured many times, and I told them I've never reported that Opine has been captured, like never ever, only until recently 3 days ago. So
since then it has been captured again.
Yeah, I think it's because of your channel. People go to your channel and then they got confused. Then they come and scold me. They're like,
no. Like I reported it captured like a week ago, and then you reported it captured like 3 days ago, and since then the Wagner has again reported that it has been captured.
Yeah, because when I announced it was not when I report it was captured. It's based on Surya maps, mapping. Based on the mapping, is clearly captured.
Yeah.
So because they are already inside Bakhmut. In the southern part of Bakhmut. So there's no reason that if you're fighting there, then you have captured the town, which is why I reported it. And then it was corroborated 2 days later. First day, it was by Ryba, which made a very weird statement saying that, they are now fighting in the northern outskirts of Opine. That was, I think, isn't that Bakhmut? So it's like, then after the next day, then the next day, then it was declared that it was captured. So that actually verifies what I said. But what I noticed is more like you will see a report of fighting of a Russian offensive, an attack on a certain village. The next day, the attack is no more. It's no longer reported. But what you get is bombardment reports, and then you have bombardment reports for 1 week. Then you see another attack, and then you will be in bombardment reports again. The attack will not be sustained because as long as the enemy is still there, still entrenched, they will not push. So maybe they send an attack. Maybe it's just a recon force. They go up, they saw the enemy engage, then they run back, and then they start bombardment.
And they pinpoint where they shoot from. They pinpoint from what houses, from what buildings. They shot from.
Or they just send the drones in.
Yeah.
Or they can just send the drones in. It's like, we got contacted in this location. Maybe they just send in the drones in and they can detect. And then they will just bombard. So in my reporting, usually is very common to see an attack from the Russian side, and then they would for 1 day only, and then they were like no more attacks for many days, and that's very common. And that kind of corroborates the theory of like they will not want to go to push a position where it's heavily defended. They will just bombard it to the point where the position is on the brink of breakdown. That's when they push. That's when you can see like a major offensive, and then the offensive will be sustained only when it inside the village or inside the town. The moment they're inside the village or inside the town, then the offensive start to get more sustained. But it also depends on the defense. So for example, like in Marinka, the Ukrainian defense is so heavy because they keep sending reinforcement and they have a lot of entrenchments and everything. Then the Russians will just have to grind. So they will have positional battles, then they will just bombard, airstrike, helicopter strike, whatever strike. Then after that, they deal an attack. And then they give up. Okay, they can bombard again. Even Marinka is the case. If you notice, that is usually the case. So, but that's from my coverage. From my point of view, that's how it looks like. So it is very similar to what you guys say. But I don't see the part of like a withdrawal. The last time I did have this is months ago, much earlier. When the Izium is still a thing, then that's when I do see the kind of like, didn't they say already captured this location like in Donbass? Then after that, then maybe the Ukrainians counterattacked, then they recaptured, but the Russians just keep quiet. It could be that kind of thing. So it's not so clear from my perspective.
But what you're saying is also happening on a small scale, and specifically, it's happening right now with the Pereskovivka and Krasnogora area, as well as Blahodatne, where first it was reported that the Russians captured these 3 villages, then suddenly they are out of it, and then they are suddenly attacking it again, and then they are out again, and then they have encircled it, and then they're out again, and then now they're attacking again. Every time the front line moves further back.
So that's the interpretation of the sources. So I don't interpret it as they withdraw. I interpret it as they attack, and then maybe they pause, they stop, then they bombard maybe.
Yeah.
So no,
But-
it's a bit different. I never seen it as a capture. There's rumors of withdrawals from the Ukrainians, but no, it was an attack. There's rumors of withdrawal, but no. Then I'm just waiting for confirmation of captures or everything. Then nothing happened. It's just being continued to be reported as being attacked by the Russian side, or the Russians are doing an offensive. So it's not that clear to me. No, it's not to me.
For example, I talked with this about this with Alex. Klishchivka, first driver reported that half of it was taken, and then the next report said a quarter of it was taken, and then the next report said they weren't even in the city. And that's 3 days in a row. And now they're reporting that they are attacking it again.
But I think the problem with all this is that sometimes you have groups that enter the village, and let's be honest, I think one of the biggest problems is that you have guys on the ground that report stuff, and we take it face value, but sometimes they don't even know where they are, like when you're in the middle of the fighting, you're like, yeah, we're half the village, but they just entered just the tip, just the tip of the village, and just the tip of the village, and
Sounds
and
like
yeah,
you
but-
enter a very big mall, right? Like you thought,
Yeah.
I have just finished walking the mall, and then you saw the map.
Yeah.
Like, the mall is so big.
But you think you entered the entire village? No, it's just the beginning, right? So I think we take a lot of these reports face value. Then Rybar reports it, but like a DPA said, it takes much more time, and they have to recon, and we forget that it's actually guys on the ground. They have to put their skin in the game. So it's not the Soviet Union where they're gonna send 10,000 guys across the field and be like, okay, we're good.
I think the main problem is maybe you guys are not reading it correctly, because Rybar sometimes share other people's content. So every time that you see the content that they post out, you need to check, is it a forwarded?
Yeah.
Because once it's forwarded, you cannot put the same level of trust. Like, because I personally when I do code, when I put it on my map, I actually go to the source and quote the source.
Yeah.
Because I realized that in the past when I do that, I get confused because I thought that there was a Rybar's information, but it's actually not. They are just forwarding the information. And then what will happen is that 1 day later or 12 hours later, they will actually correct themselves or correct the post that, this is actually not true. They have checked with their sources and everything. So which is why we need to be mindful, because Rybar is actually usually very careful. So and so when they forward information, we have to take note that it's actually a forwarded information. So I think that's the reason why you can see you might have this discrepancy where they captured half, then maybe become a quarter, then they're not there. Yeah. So
but this was all displayed on their mapping. But I think the real reason is that with the recent capture of Soledar, we have to take it with a bigger pinch of salt.
Yeah, I personally don't trust Rybar's mapping. Like, to be honest, so I want to share one experience is that I believe that the one they write in text is the main guy that is writing. The mapping is done by another guy. So sometimes the one that is doing the mapping misinterpreted the text, and then they mapped it wrongly. Because I actually ever seen the writing totally clash with the mapping. So like certain towns, in the map they mark it as captured. I think that was during the Khaki Front era, where the Khaki Front is still a thing. The certain towns in the map is captured by the Russian forces. They put it in red, but in the text is actually not. And then sometimes it's like it might be a miscommunication between their team members, which is why I don't trust the mapping that much. I use it only for referencing. Like sometimes I do not know exactly what they're talking about. Sometimes they be a bit too descriptive. I don't know where the hell they're talking about. So I open the map just to check where exactly they're talking about.
And what do you think of the Russian map, the paid one, the military map, something like this?
I don't use it. So you have to ask. I think.
Do you guys use
I
it?
don't use it.
Yeah, because
which map are you talking about?
Military map.
Military map, yeah.
I don't know if I've seen it.
I think the one military summary uses, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
You have
Yeah,
to,
military
that's behind a
summary.
paywall. I haven't used it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's under behind a paywall, so no,
sometimes I see screenshots of it, and sometimes it seems very detailed, like, oh,
Yeah, I
destroyed
think it's
gun here, destroyed
yeah.
units here, but
Which is
it's
why I
too
don't trust.
precise. I think
Too-
it's
too-
too
too much
precise.
information.
Yeah, it's too much, and you're like overwhelmed with it.
and it's also too much information for us to digest, which is why like even my mapping, it's very watered down in a way. Like sometimes a lot of information is redundant, so so I don't put it in. Like bombardment reports. It's like every day there's bombardment. So like, I did try to do it like over 1 or 2 weeks. Then after that, I was like, what the hell am I doing? And nobody cares.
Yeah.
I did it for like
And it
3
clutters
days.
the entire map. The whole map is just full of
Yeah.
icons, so it's a waste of time.
It's useless. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so to finish this this thing, what are your predictions? Let's say, what do you think is going to happen from now on with about Solidar Bakhmut using the latest developments? So we at first, then New World Econ.